There you go. They could have hired me to do the voiceover, but they didn't. So my name is Elise Dewsbury. I'm the artistic director at New Musicals, Inc. here in North Hollywood, and we're very happy to have another one of our ProChats that has been set up by our member representative, Michael Gordon Shapiro, who is a member of our writing community who also represents our members to the board and has set up this series to try and just give some more wonderful opportunities for people to learn and grow in their craft. And we're happy to welcome Sam Carner for the chat today. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael. He's going to be hosting this. And as I said, we'll talk later. We'll open it up for some chat. And if people have any questions about NMI in particular, I can answer them after we've spoken to Sam. But Michael, go ahead and take it over and introduce us to Sam.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that pre-intro, Elise. Sam, thank you for joining us here today on the chat. It's not really a show, but thanks for joining us for this chat.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I thought I'd start with the hypothetical elevator pitch. You're riding an elevator with a polite stranger, and you have in conversation about 30 seconds to synopsize your entire life and who you are professionally. How would you do that?
I would say that I'm a musical theater lyricist and librettist and educator. I've written 4 or 5 full-length musicals, some of which have been produced in New York and had regional and amateur lives. And I'm also increasingly getting into the kind of education sphere as a professor and instructor on musical theater, writing at the kind of post-high school and post-college often level, and also becoming a thinker and writer on the form of musical theater from an analytical perspective, as well as my creative work.
That was exceptionally eloquent for a on-the-fly self-description. Jumping back historically, when did you first decide you were interested in creating musical theater?
I was probably about 12. And I had always been, my parents always took me to see shows. And I grew up in Maine, and there was a really wonderful, especially amateur theater community there. Lots and lots of community theaters putting on all sorts of plays and musicals. And there was also a Maine State Music Theater, which some of you may know. And so my parents took me to see shows at all of these different places and exposed me to the world of musical theater. And I also just had found that I took to writing little songs. I think I wrote my first song at age 8, and it came reasonably easily to me. And I written this long story, and for some reason had written songs into it. This is around when I was about 10. And then the Children's Theater of Maine, which was this local organization, had a young playwrights contest where the winner got produced. And my dad suggested that I turn this story I had written with songs into a musical. So I thought, why not? And this is when I was 12, 13, and wrote this musical, which won the contest and had a 12 performance run at the Children's Theater of Maine. And I really continued from there.
That's a really wonderful origin story. And it strikes me how a little bit of encouragement at a young age can really go such a tremendously long way.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, and also I think a combination of the encouragement from certainly my parents. I was very, very fortunate to have parents that were understanding of this and encouraging of this habit, and also the community that I was able to be part of by virtue of writing this show was also really appealing to me.
Did you find that even at that young age, you had a sense that this is what you wanted to do for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would have admitted it at that time, but I continued doing it, and I had a pretty good idea by the time I was doing my next show. that I remember coming home actually from from the final production, the final performance of that first show, and saying to my parents, well, I hope this isn't the high point of my life. And but I already knew there was something very special.
That would have been, that shows a lot of insight, even just having that paranoia at such a young age. But it clearly wasn't. What about formal education? I understand that you studied at Yale and also the graduate musical theater program at NYU. Is that correct?
Right. So after that first show, I was already enjoyed musical theater, but I sort of made it my mission to educate myself about the history of musical theater. And I got my hands over the next 3 or 4 years while writing shows. I also got my hands on the cast album of every Cole Porter, every Irving Berlin, every Rodgers and Hart, every Gershwin show I could get my hands on. It was a lot harder then to do that, but than it is now. But I sort of educated myself about the world of musical theater. And then in college, I studied, I went to Yale for undergrad, and I studied English and music and dramatic literature, as well as opera. Actually, that was I don't know if any of you are familiar with the composer Al Carmines, but he wrote the musical Promenade, among other things, which was a 1969 avant-garde show that he wrote with Maria Irene Fornes. And he wrote some other, kind of a reasonably successful off-Broadway career as a composer. And I met him, I think, during my sophomore year in college and in New York. We were introduced, and I played him a few things, and his big suggestion to me was study grand opera. So I took it upon myself to study opera musicology in college, which was really life-changing, as well as other things like art history and psychology, both of which really tie in one way or another to the world of musical theater writing. And also there was a professor there who was teaching the music theory of Golden Age composers. So I took some courses in that, and essentially created my own combined areas of study, focused on learning what I thought I needed to learn to write musical theater. And then I went to the NYU grad musical theater writing program right out of college and spent 2 years there, which was really a wonderful experience as well, especially insofar as that program is very much an own voice program. And I think I had gained as much enough of a grounding in the form and structure of musical theater to find that freeing rather than intimidating.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What you mean by own voice? Sure.
I mean, they really have no definition as to what a musical should be or can be, and they don't really. When I was there, they didn't really teach much about musical theater history, and only did it nominally. It was sort of it was really about you working with other people to create your own definition of musical theater. And I think that for some people that really didn't have a strong foundation in musical theater, that was in musical theater history, that was interesting, and but I think that they had a little more trouble understanding what they were doing, understanding the form. Whereas for me, that approach, that anything could be a musical, was really freeing because I had been living in a slightly smaller box.
So sometimes it's easier to immerse yourself in structure before escaping from that structure and finding where you fit in the new world of what's to come.
That was what I found. I mean, personally, I think other people need to do it the other way around. They need to sort of intuit the form, and then intuit what they're interested in, and then grasp at what has been done before to inform that work. But for me, it was helpful, I think, to do it the other way around.
I guess you could argue that following whatever happens to motivate you at the early phases of your education might be most fruitful. And if you're really into the classics of music theater, you should jump in and really indulge yourself there. And if you're maybe someone who's less centered in what they want to do and just exploring different areas of music, maybe it's better to dabble first. And then if you feel like you've locked on to your calling, go backwards. I could see that argument.
Yeah, I mean, following passion is often a great way into any aspect of the arts. I mean, and just really to if you can understand what your passion is.
Now, moving forward to the meat of your career, a lot of your work is collaborative with the composer Derek Gregor. How did the two of you first come into contact?
We met at the NYU program. We're obviously there for the 2 years together, but they sort of do this. The first year is sort of a round robin year, and each of the participants is paired, or each of the words people is paired with each of the music people for the first year for different assignments. And Derek and I had the good fortune to be paired. Well, first of all, I came in as a composer lyricist, so I didn't get paired with everybody over my time there. And in fact, I was paired with more. I worked more as a composer the first year, but I was paired with Derek for a 4-week project, a 1-act, and that was, I think, very fortunate because we really discovered our connection and the things, our aesthetic connection, really in the second week. I'm not sure if we had only 1 week, if we would have actually gotten there, or discovered that we really had a special connection. But having a little more time was really valuable. And I'll tell you, one thing that I learned from just the experience of working with a lot of people and from watching a lot of people work together is that I think in finding a collaborator, people often try to find someone who likes the same things, who has the same sense of style. But based on my experience, I actually think it's more important to find someone who has the same sense of tone and style itself. Interest, genre, and even the things you like can be totally different. As long as you have the same sense of what is dramatic, what's funny, and being willing to put aside some of those very specific stylistic interests.
What would be an example of a way that you feel like you and Derek are exactly on the same page, and an example of where you have contrasting approaches?
Sure. Well, I mean, Derek's background was in, and interests really was in Baroque and classical and contemporary rock. And my interest was in late 19th century opera and operetta through golden age of musical theater. And over the course of, and I was educating myself as to more contemporary things and other things as well, but that was really my go-to aesthetic, and Derek's was sort of everything else. But we had a similar sense of, the thing we first connected on was that we both hated the button. The song ends, especially a calm, especially a kind of a more soulful song, and then boom. We both hated that, and we vowed never to do that in our work together.
Just to headbutt in for a second, you dropped out when you were describing what it was that you hated. Your voice dropped out for a second, but I think you said the button, right?
The button, yes. Okay, yeah. Great. The song that, boom. We hated the button. We vowed never to use it in our own writing. And we haven't. But I mean, that actually stands for something. I think that stands for wanting to let, a desire on some level to want to let the moment be the moment, and not try to define it as necessarily a moment that is over, or a moment that is artificially ended.
There's also a prompting in a way when you have the button, you're almost turning to the audience and saying, you like that? And that is a form of breaking the fourth wall, which in some circumstances may work brilliantly, but I can imagine that you might want something different. So that was your point of bonding, was your
that was the initial point of bonding, but we both had this tendency that we fell into once we realized that we wanted to write comedy or things that had a comic element. Derek was very much into this very earnest kind of Les Mis inspired sort of thing. And we started out trying to write something in that genre. And then we realized that we were actually writing a comedy, which was a comment that Michael John Lucusa made that really kind of transformed our thinking about the project and each other. And at that point, what we sort of fell into this rhythm where we were able to create an almost constant cognitive dissonance, where when one of us was taking a more earnest approach, say in the lyrics or in the music, the other was was sort of undercutting it slightly, playing against it ever so slightly in the words or the music, and trading off, not letting any moment get too earnest or actually certainly too cynical, finding the soul in comedy and the humor in drama.
That's interesting, because I'm thinking now of Island Song in particular, how every moment in that show tends to have an intermixture of those two elements. Maybe the hipster interludes are strict comedy, but the other songs, as I remember them, even if they're very poignant, there's almost always a moment of levity or amusing irony thrown in along the way. It might even just be an unexpected lyric choice that even in a dramatic context feels a little whimsical, and so it never quite gets lachrymose or heavy.
Right, and we both have I think a skeptical tendency, maybe a tendency to overthink, but to try to find the gray areas, and that aesthetic was something we shared and have, I guess, cultivated on some level together in our collaboration.
If we do a bird's eye view of your collaborative output, there's Island Song, which is a contemporary look at the perspective of young people or 30-ish people in New York City, all trying to make their way in the island, either professionally or romantically or both. You have Unlocked, which is a whimsical, maybe neo-baroquely styled fairy tale or something in a magical historical setting. You've got a Second Line, which takes place in post-Katrina New Orleans, which I presume is going to have a lot of dramatic content. And then Techies, which seems to lean more towards lightheartedness, at least in some aspects of being referential to the social castes within the theater at a high school. So there's a lot of diversity of location and seemingly of style and tone. Do you think there's something that unifies those shows, even though they're set in such different places and times?
I mean, I think that probably, I'm sure that there is something about the guiding aesthetic that unifies them. I think that everything we do, we want it to be tuneful. We want it to have moments that are explosive. We want it to have, I think everything we do, we really try to push the dynamic range of the piece as far as it can go, from small and intimate to enormous and tremendously energetic. And so I think we're always trying to do that in everything. We're always trying to find, what is the emotional heart of this, and really write into that, and also what is where is the hilarity? And I mean, I think probably every musical theater writer is looking to do that. I think that we also are doing it. We try to really make sometimes extreme choices in service of that. And actually, that business of being able to undercut each other makes it easier, I think, to make extreme choices, because we always know that another element is there to reel it in as soon as it goes too far.
Do you think that what you're referring to is the undercutting, the tempering of drama with comedy or vice versa? Is that a conscious decision? Do you say, hey, we're getting a little heavy here, let's lighten up? Or is that the result of your respective artistic instincts when they're working together?
I think it's actually both. I think often what we do as artists is we understand, we have certain intuitions, certain instincts, and then we look to cultivate those instincts and look at what we're doing and look at why we have an impulse to do something aesthetically, and then decide and ask ourselves, is that a strong impulse? Is that a weak impulse? How do I want to honor that impulse? So I think that Derek and I both, I think that is our natural aesthetic, and then we make conscious choices to do it after discussions, arguments, all sorts of things. Another big part of what we do, and I actually think this is something that probably only comes with collaborative experience, but we also are very willing. We are always looking to undercut each other, and we're both only children, so perhaps there's some sibling rivalry there. But we also are very willing and eager to get out of the way, to say, okay, this moment is about the music. The lyrics can't have anything that's too interesting. Has to be apt, but it can't be pulling attention. And similarly, Derek, sometimes this moment is the lyric. It's all this. I mean, and I'm not saying the whole song, but this moment in the song is all about the lyric. It's all about the joke. So the music has to get out of the way. An example of that that just comes to mind is in our song "Wall Lovin'" from Island Song. And there's it goes. I mean, the chorus is. The song is about this guy who hears his next door neighbor's late night social life, and he's in love with her, and he sings, "Give me some wall lovin', shabop shabop," and it keeps coming to the shabop shabop. And in the final chorus, when he actually meets her and she comes over, he sings, "She'll bop, I'll bop," and Derek pulls the accompaniment entirely. So the line is, "Pass on the wall, love and accompaniment out. She'll bop, I'll bop," and then it comes back in. We've got some sweet wall love to achieve, etc. So, but the point is that he knew that the joke is subtle, and it needed, and that cutting out the accompaniment would both serve to draw attention to it and let us hear it very clearly. And that's a great, there it's pulling out for one measure, but we're constantly trying to do that kind of thing in our collaboration.
So like bandmates in a band, you know when to step back and let the other one solo a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Derek has a lot of experience in a rock band, actually, so I think that plays into it.
That may be a more literal analogy than I intended then.
Yeah. But I think that the other thing that we're always trying to do, this sounds strange, but we're always writing for an audience, and which means we always want to give an audience a good tune. We always want to say something that will resonate with the audience. I mean, a big part of what we try to do is what I call crystallize experience. No matter what the setting is, give our audience a few moments of something that helps define perhaps in a new way, an experience they have had, or a thing that they have thought, put it into words. I think Alexander Pope said, "True wit is nature's best advantage dressed, what was often thought but ne'er so well expressed," or something like that, something close to that, an essay on criticism. And that idea of trying to express what has been often thought, but perhaps unexpressed, is something that, I think that's something that most musical theater writers are really trying to do. I think we just are willing to, we just kind of say explicitly that we're trying to do it.
Well, if you look at the example you were just referring to, which is wall loving, loving with an apostrophe, there are some universal themes there. There's envy, there's wistfulness. It's getting a taste of an experience you want, in this case, intimacy, which you think you're hearing through the wall in your neighbor's apartment. And then there's this kind of a message about hopes and expectations, saying don't give up because the thing you want might be a little closer than you anticipate. So it offers a gentle, optimistic commentary on that scenario. So you are approaching, an eternal topic in a way that is very endemic to a particular time and space, and then providing a nice little optimistic twist at the end. So I think that's a great example of what you were just describing.
Yes. Right, and we're all, in this day and age, we are all, whether we want to be or not. In the age of the internet, we are all, it's impossible to escape voyeurism. It's impossible to escape being aware of what the people around you, or not around you, but in your network, whether you know them or not, are up to.
Especially as we say this on Zoom with a number of invisible observers,
right, exactly,
watching every word. For the benefit of the many musical theater creators in our audience right now, I'd like to take a vertical slice of your career and maybe look at how that progressed from beginning to present day. Thinking about Island Song in particular, which I get the sense that is the most performed of your works thus far. Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
So what is the genesis of this show? Actually, let me pause. Can you give me another elevator pitch, just a big picture overview of that show for anyone who hasn't seen or heard it yet?
Sure. Island Song is it's a musical, a kind of musical dramedy with one toe in review and one toe in book musical, about 5, 20, and 30 something New Yorkers and who are strangers at the beginning of the piece, and throughout the piece find that they are connected in ways, and either connected or come into contact in random but meaningful ways that change their trajectory throughout the year. The show takes place over the course of the year, and it's about the connections that bring them together and how that reinflects their experience.
Great. So what's the genesis of the show? When did the idea first come to you both?
Really, part of it was we had written Unlocked, which had some success, and we wanted to show people that we didn't just write kind of neoclassical pop operetta, because some people thought, people often think you do one thing, that's all you do. So we wanted to do something very different. So we started writing. Well, part of it actually, the show had just, in terms of the logistics, it hit a bump in the road, and we, with some contractual stuff, and we essentially had to take about a year off of working on it. So we figured, why not take our career into our own hands and write some standalone songs that that all they need to be performed is a microphone and a piano, and essentially we thought of this as writing 4-minute musicals, 4-minute one-person musicals. And so we started writing these shows that were rather different from Unlocked, essentially pop rock musical theater songs, often with a, with a very kind of contemporary slant. Wall 11 has its kind of 50s rockabilly thing, but it's about a very contemporary kind of situation. So, and the other songs had a similarly contemporary bent. And once we had written a handful of these songs, we found that we were gravitating toward writing songs about experiences that either we or our friends in New York City had. And often creating kind of Frankenstein's monsters, maybe like an experience that happened to one friend blended with the personality of another friend. So nothing was too biographical or autobiographical, but they had biographical and autobiographical tendencies. So after writing these, after writing a handful of these and doing a concert, we realized that there were some themes that a lot of them had in common. First of all, many of them had to do with urban existence in one way or another. And they also had to do with these themes of alienation and connection, the way that they can happen at the same time, often ambition and distraction in one way or another. And so and the songs, after a year or two, started to have a life of their own. They started to be performed, by, in cabarets around the country, around the world. And because of that, some people suggested to us, why not try to create an umbrella to house all of this stuff? It was, partially a marketing decision, but we also made the commitment that if we were going to do that, we were going to make it make artistic sense. I will say, trying to take a bunch of pre-existing songs and put them into a framework that makes sense and is meaningful is just as much, if not more, work than writing a show from scratch. But a big challenge was that many of the songs, because they were standalone songs, had resolutions. And when you're trying to write a show that is when you're trying to write a show that's not just a pure review, you need the songs to be more open-ended. You can only earn so many resolutions, and generally the resolutions are rather smaller. So over the course of the next couple of years, we first defined who the characters were, like what the character tracks were that might go with these songs. We already knew our basic theme, so that was there. But figuring out what the plot was and what the character tracks were was much more involved. And then along with that came jettisoning some songs that maybe contributed too much to resolution too early, and then writing some new songs that served very specifically the plots that we were constructing, while also being complete enough that they felt like they could stand alone if they needed to. And that was quite a needle to thread.
What I think is interesting is how, from what I can tell you, you've solved that problem by having some of the songs provide local resolution and perhaps open the door to a new conflict or a new goal or opportunity without giving broad resolution to the characters. So to make it concrete, if you think of Wall Loving, you have a guy in New York City who's lonely, and he's listening to what he imagines to be sounds of intimacy from the next apartment, and then surprise, he has an opportunity to meet with the person in question when it turns out she was on more of a solo flight than he assumed. So that solves the immediate problem, right? He's not lonely, but now there's that whole relationship you've opened up, and that becomes a plot thread of the entire show.
And in musicals, actually, often, we think about the importance of the I want at the beginning, and that is important. but often things get interesting when the characters get what they want. That's usually what opens the door to what the show is really about.
So
the characters getting what they think they want,
Sorry, I didn't mean to trot off the end of what you said. So if we look at now the history of Island Song, you've got some successful cabaret shows that have been modified and integrated into a larger texture. Given that you now have this new creation, what was the next step for you?
I mean, we spent, once we kind of wrote a draft of it, and I think this was aided because the songs had a little bit of a life already. It was, we did a handful of workshops, mostly at universities, and had a chance to workshop and try out the songs, or sorry, try out the show, play with the order, play with, really ask ourselves what story we were telling or what stories we were telling. And yeah, so we did a series of workshops at universities and, and a couple small theaters, notably the Bloomington Playwrights Project in Indiana. They were, I mean, they're a really wonderful resource, actually. They do exclusively new work, mostly new plays, but they do a couple new musicals every year. And yeah, we did it there. A little after that, once we had pretty much a show that we were happy with, we did a production at the Adirondack Theater Festival, which is a small regional theater in upstate New York. And then we began we made one more set of revisions after that. And then we began the process of working on a recording. It was a show that we never really saw as an off-Broadway show or a major New York show. We always saw it as its birth was as a show that was being done around the country, and we thought that it made sense as a show for communities. So we weren't really holding out for a major New York production before we were going to license it. And part of the reason it's our most performed show is it's the one we opened up for licensing. It's the one we opened up for licensing, period. And we set about trying to work on a cast album, which we spent about a year making. And then once that was finished, we threw open the doors and made it available for licensing.
Do you license it directly or do you work through a publisher?
Funny you should ask that. We have been licensing it ourselves until just last week. So we did the whole self-licensing thing, which worked out reasonably well. I think on the strength of the cast album, honestly. I mean, that was doing all of our marketing because we weren't putting a lot of resources into marketing it ourselves. And I think the really smart move we made with the album was to make it available for free. Our goal with it was not to make money on the album, but to get the album into as many hands as possible so that people would license the show. So we made it available for free on our website, and there have been thousands of copies downloaded. We encourage people to share it. It's not that's not piracy as far as we're concerned, and that has happened. And and then we entered Spotify and that whole thing, and that's disseminated it more. But we just signed with Uproar Theatrics, which is a brand new company based in California, actually, that licenses, and they're licensing especially to the amateur and educational market. And they have a marketing machine that we never really even wanted to have. So and we like their model a lot. They're really not trying to, they're trying to make everything available at a price that's affordable to truly affordable to stock and amateur and educational groups. They don't have, they don't have the massive materials fees or rental fees. They have materials and rental fees, but they're not massive in the way that certain other houses are. So we liked that aspect of their model, and we signed on with them, and now we'll see what happens.
What I think is really interesting about the life cycle of the show and inspiring to new creators of musicals is how it was a creator-driven project and worked its way up from the ground floor upwards. From the fact that you started with individual songs and then built a larger structure out of that, and evolved to self-marketing and eventually a collaboration with a publisher. Whereas, if you think of a producer-driven project where a veteran producer says, I'm going to buy the life rights to Peter Mayhew, and calls up his friend at the Walter Kerr and says, can we run the Chewbacca costume story, and the whole thing, and then they say, who's going to write this, who's going to compose, and it's very top down, and this is much more originating from the creative collaborators. I think that's a great story to hear because it's inspiring.
Yeah, I think most of what we do has been kind of bottom up. And I was thinking about it the other day there's been a lot of talk about the Broadway institution and corruption and just cruelty. And I think about the fact that I've been hearing some of these same stories for years, as everybody in the business. But I was struck by the fact that I don't really feel I've ever experienced it. And I think that largely is because kind of all of my projects are basically driven by Derek and me and what we're interested in doing. And, it comes with a lot of hustling, but the upside is that we're able to do what we want, and we're able to work with people that we want.
That's great to hear. Just to give you a sense of the overview of what we're going to do at this point, I'm going to have a few more questions. So we're going to broaden the focus a little bit until noon, and then we'll open up for questions from those watching in the chat room. And we'll have about 15 minutes for that. So it's too bad because I had so many questions and I have to just pick my favorites. You are director of the Creators Division from the Institute of American Musical Theater, and you teach book analysis and lyrics. And I'm curious how your perspective as an educator has informed your process as a show creator. What have you learned from your students or learned from the process of teaching that trickles back to when you're writing something?
There's so much. You look at what someone's doing and you think about, well, why is this working? Why isn't it working? And then you try to be helpful, and you say something, maybe offer a piece of advice, and you say, well, that was really smart. I should try doing that myself. I think there are a lot of instances of that. I'll tell you, it tends to be fairly specific. One thing that I said to a student that I then started taking as advice myself was, and this is a student I was teaching at Temple University, but the student had written this sort of amusing scene, but it didn't have a ton of tension in it. And I was trying to speak to the drama at the core of it. And the student said, well, it's really setting something up in the next scene. And I said, there is no next scene. And what I meant by that was that in musical theater, we always need to have drama and tension now, and that will lead to the next problem. But it's a relay race, and there's always a race that needs to be run in every scene. And then I thought to myself, yeah, that's pretty good advice. I should start doing that. And so it caused me to actually revise and rethink aspects of a lot of shows I was working on. Um, in general, I think being asked questions by smart people that you don't know the answer to uh, forces you to, especially if you come at it with a desire to actually get to what you think rather than to get out of the fact you've been asked a question you don't know the answer to, which I always try to do. I always try to be really honest and say if I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer. I'll come back to you next week. But that time when you go away and have to think about it, I found that I've learned so much from it's from the questions that people ask, from the questions that I then ask myself. And from from seeing really and also, I mean, this sounds much darker than I mean it to, but from seeing really talented people do stuff that doesn't quite work, and having to get to the bottom of, like, what is it that's not quite working. Yeah, and there are tons of lessons that I learned from that.
So relatedly to that, no doubt you've had an opportunity to see a lot of projects by young musical theater creators in the classroom and perhaps outside of the classroom. If you could pick an area in both the creative side and the business side that you think that young or new creators, not necessarily young, but new creators, don't pay enough attention to, what would those be?
I would say, I mean, I'm sure I'm biased as a kind of primarily words person at this point, but I think it really has to do with structure and managing structural tension in a show. I think that everyone, I think, and the reason people don't pay attention to it is it's first of all, it doesn't sound romantic when you speak about it that way, and it sounds rather mechanical, and it's also under the surface, and you can't see structure. You can see a character and what a character does, but I would say that what I have found is that when you care about a character, it's because you care about what the character is doing and what the character's role in a structure is, rather than the soul of the character. And when we think about characters when we think about what an authentic character is, I believe that what we really mean is, when we talk about an authentic character, we're talking about someone who is being pulled in multiple directions, who has tension. I mean, literally tension, tugs on their loyalty, not just a reason to do something, but a reason not to do it at the same time. I know, I've talked in my class that, Michael, you were involved in, about stakes and counter stakes. That idea that when a musical is really working, it's not just about someone wanting something big, and even not just about wanting something and having an obstacle. It's about wanting something and also having significant reasons they should do the opposite. And that, when we have that kind of dynamic with various characters, I think we tend to think of those characters as three-dimensional.
So Jean Valjean can be silent, and he can see somebody convicted for his crime and go away safely, or he can preserve his sense of integrity by stepping up. So he's got two options, or both are compelling.
Right. And Javert can discover Valjean's humanity and then be in a real pickle.
I think your formulation of stakes and counter stakes is top of the list of things that I personally am going to steal from you, because I thought it was such a great observation of something we see all the time, but maybe don't recognize.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, right. We know it when we feel it, but it's actually hard to define. And I think that's why it's easy to skip. And obstacles are a lot easier to write than tension. And the other big thing that I think writers tend to often undervalue is the power of aspiration specifically. That it's not, for me, at least in a musical, it's not enough to just want something. That want has to be somehow deeply aspirational. In other words, and the reason this is easy to miss is that movies and novels and plays and every other form may often have characters that have wants, but those wants are often they're often not aspirational per se. That can also often seem cheesy. The want can be to get back the family fortune that I lost, to get back. I mean, it can often be to get back to zero, or to get back to sea level, or just to be okay after a tragedy strikes. And we all know. I mean, this is probably 3/4 of the movies that we see are on some level about wanting to be okay after a problem happens, or to get back to kind of sea level in some sense. Musicals really demand more than that. I would say that they demand getting. There can be a problem that starts things going, but the attitude of the character essentially has to be, well, that's okay. I'm going to be better than ever. I'm going to get it back and more. And that, I mean, that's, if we think about it, I mean, in Gypsy, Rose is always failing, but she always has this attitude of, we're going to be stars. This setback is only going to give us more propulsion when we shoot to the moon. So, and that spirit is actually, I think, really important in musicals.
And if we think of Island Song, you have the lawyer character. She is very ambitious in a career scale, but she frames it as almost like conquering the city. There's a grandiosity and a scope for ambition. So we feel that there's an aspirational quality to that.
Right. I mean, the first line is, maybe today I'll close the deal because I feel one deal could seal my promotion, win the way to the 50th floor where I'll finally get a view to the ocean. I mean, she's already looking at the end of the journey, which is apotheosis for her.
Sure, I'm not even commenting just on the choice of concretes that you use to represent her ambition, like the 50th floor, but just the tone and spirit of the song that you wrote. There's a kind of big picture attitude to it. We get swept up with the scope of it. I'm sure there are a lot of questions from our viewers, and I want to leave as much time as I can for them. But before we jump into that, I just want to ask you to rattle off social media, websites, any way that people can keep tabs of what you're doing or follow your adventures forward.
Oh, sure. Well, carnerandgregor.com is our website. We're on Facebook.com/Carner and Gregor. I think it's Instagram/Carner and Gregor, Twitter/Carner and Gregor. We don't really do much on Twitter or as much on Instagram as we should, or really Facebook either. But our website is carnerandgregor.com, and YouTube is, I believe, youtube.com/Carner and Gregor, where we have a ton of videos of different performances. And for anyone who's interested in the Institute for American Musical Theater, that's IA Musical Theater, iammusicaltheater.com/creators.
Awesome. So the way we'll handle Q&A is we're just going to encourage people to type questions into the chat screen. So if you don't know where that is, if you look at the bottom of your toolbar, the second I said that, question started appearing. There's a little button that says chat with a cartoon balloon icon. You press that and you've got a chat window. And Sam, you will have your choice of questions to pick and answer. I'll just encourage you that if we get a lot, then scroll back just so that if someone asks a question early, it doesn't scroll off into oblivion and get ignored for that reason.
Sure. I was asking they're asking for chat social media, so I can do that. A couple of biggies. There's one.
There's going to be a little bit of chaos as different things overlap in the chat room, so
Okay.
Bear with us, because that's just the nature of the beast.
I'm curious about the issues that occur when a character gets what they want in Genie in the Bottle type story. Right. What I really mean by that is that, I mean, a great, we all have heard this idea of the hill behind the hill, right? And the way we get to the hill behind the hill, I think, is often with fulfillment of what a character thinks they want up front. An example of this is in Hairspray, Tracy Turnblatt can't move on to her racial justice theme until she's actually gotten the thing that she wanted up front, which was to dance on TV. So we're able to move on to the larger issue once she gets what she wants initially. In My Fair Lady, we can't get on to the really important issue of, is everyone going to get along in the long term, and how is Eliza going to make a life for herself until, and is Higgins going to become a feeling human being, until Higgins has won the bet and Eliza has achieved her goal of speaking English properly. In neither of these cases have the characters anticipated what's actually going to be important to them. They're pursuing their goal, and they achieve their goal, and then the achievement of that goal actually throws into question the larger issues that they didn't even know were there. That's kind of what I mean by that. Other lesser known composers that, Al Carner is really wonderful, long deceased at this point, unfortunately, but I don't know who lesser known, I don't know what counts as lesser known.
Maybe somebody up and coming in New York that you know, that you want to draw some spotlight on.
Sure.
Thanks for answering my question about I've never heard the term hill behind the hill. So that 100% applies to something I'm writing right now. She wants to be famous, and it's a switch lives thing. And then she gets it and problems occur. So thank you. That helps me a lot.
My pleasure. Yeah. And that usually happens by around, it typically happens by the first scene in the second act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I have it. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. How do you and your collaborator find the appropriate musical style for a project? Right. I would say that a lot of it has to do with what we want to write, what we're interested in, but also I think the appropriate musical style is not just a single thing. The appropriate musical style is often a nexus of things, and that's really the discussion that we will have: is how far does it go in one direction, how far does it go in another direction, what kinds of genres can it get into, and often what we'll do is we'll start writing a song at one extreme. If we're looking at a piece that, say, can have a hip hop dimension and also kind of classic musical theater ballads, if we feel like that's kind of it's a show that has room for both, we would probably write both. We would probably write the hip hop number and the musical theater ballad, and then ask ourselves, okay, well, we've started to define the extremes of what this show can be. What's in the middle? And then start to write something that somehow blends allows the two to feel coherent in the same show. So we often try to define the extremes and then find the center. And then once we've done that, try to figure out what else this overall template allows for, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for answering my question. It's terrific.
Great. But I think genre is really important. I mean, genre will tell you a lot about what what's going on in a situation, especially if it's a genre that's not obvious. And of course, there are other ways of also working against genre. I mean, you can have something that's in one genre as a piano vocal score, or one genre sort of in theory, except that certain aspects of arrangement can pull against it and pull it into something else. We're in a little bit of a post-genre world. So yes, yeah. But I think we like to try to find the extremes. How far can it go in any given direction? And then let's see. All right, let's see something from No. I love dancing in pairs. Someone much younger than me told me his generation thought romantic expressions sound fake. What would your reaction if you saw a teenaged boy in real life say to his girlfriend, "Today the world is just in a dress," or "Tonight there will be no morning star"? You'd think he was a bullshitter because the falseness of those lines would convey exactly that. Right. So I think that, I think that this really has to do with to what extent we believe that characters are speaking to each other in a song. Characters, if they are in a purely internal world, are allowed, I think, to become a little more high flown. We can allow them a little more grandiosity than if we believe that what they are singing represents an actual communication to another person. So I would agree that if you're writing a contemporary romantic ballad between a couple of teenagers, that some of the grandiosity of West Side Story might seem false. If you're finding characters in a little more of an internal place, you might be able to get away with more. And of course, if they're singing a song if they're singing a diegetic song, they can be doing anything. So I think there's still ways of getting some of that heightened romanticism. It just probably happens in a slightly different way. And I do think that characters can be deeply romantic. It's just, what we're really talking about there is there's something about the phrasing of "tonight there will be no morning star" that sounds rather high flown. But there would be a slightly more colloquial way of saying the same thing. And you could certainly sing "tonight." But I mean, the morning star is an idea that just doesn't really feel as if it feels. It feels like it's sort of not part of the popular parlance anymore. But there would be something similar you could say. You could sing about the moon disappearing. You could. There would be things I think you could do that still might have a heightened quality to them. Hope that answers your question. Dancing in Pairs, crucially, is about a character who is in her own mental space. It's a soliloquy number, and she is thinking about a romantic past that she doesn't actually have access to, which is part of so there's that's a lot of the undertow to me in that song. What are some examples in your work of the lyrics letting the music speak? I think that a song like perhaps So Many Windows. There is some from Island Song. There's some busy sections, but then there are also some a lot of the whole second half of the song is a lot of kind of open space where really there and repetition of previous phrases like we wait.
You can also think of the opening number where there's the wordless refrain, the
oh yeah, the O's
yeah.
and yeah, a go, or it's actually go, but go and O, right? And some of and then there's also, and right before that in the opening number, there's that kind of round robin of I can hear it calling just around the corner. Maybe today I'll catch it. I can hear it calling. I mean, and it's just a cycle of that. I wouldn't really call it an ostinato, but it's something like a lyrical ostinato, and that is a chance for the music to be building and the emphasis to be on the music, because we don't have to be engaging our brain to figure out what's being said because we've heard it.
Whenever there's rhetorical repetition like that, it's probably for the benefit of the musical effect rather than saying, in case you didn't hear that lyric, here it is 5 times,
right.
Which, as you might have done like in Gilbert and Sullivan when the acoustics of the room were a little dubious. So I think, or you could argue maybe the same thing whenever there's a prolonged vowel. We don't have to hear that vowel for 5 seconds, but it's a chance to be musically expressive.
Right. What does post-genre mean? What I really mean is that songs can exist especially in the era of pop, can exist in multiple genres at the same time. Can have, like an example is For Good from Wicked, which is on some level. I mean, the core of the song is actually a Dolly Parton style country song, but the arrangement is kind of more contemporary pop and kind of contemporary musical theater-y pop. There are other elements. Yeah, there are other. I mean, once it gets into the song, it sort of abandons that Dolly Parton kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it lives in a few worlds at once. Does anybody have a map from Dear Evan Hansen? Starts out as this, this kind of contemporary, new musical theater. Then somehow a salsa kind of rhythm starts up once she gets into the chorus. Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of it ends up being. I don't want to say a genre soup because it's a little more articulated than that, but it's a blend. It's a blend, and it's able to call on different genres at different times when it needs them, and often simultaneously.
Perhaps at this juncture, you can look at Richard's question, and then we'll say farewell to everyone.
Right. Do you go into a project with a theme in mind, or do you discover the theme as you write the story? I would say I've done both, honestly. I often have I would say I tend to go into a story more with a dramatic theme in mind than necessarily a life theme in mind. I often go into a project with what I think is dramatic and kind of compelling from a dramatic and character point of view, but not necessarily a sense of what makes it universal. And that comes more from sort of thinking about the project through the course of writing.
Cool. Well, we'll have to stop things here, but of course you can all reach out to Sam through the social media and the website links that he provided earlier. And he does teach at IMT Creators. So that's another way to hear more of his thoughts on all these subjects. For now, and yes, there's his email for just reaching out directly. So thanks to everyone who joined us today, and thanks to NMI as always for hosting these. And Sam, thanks so much for both sharing your biography and all of the general thoughts and wisdom on what I call musical theater theory. I think that somewhere where you're a really unique contributor, and I always like hearing your thoughts on those subjects.
Yes, thank you so much. Great to hear from you, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much.